watching the chapter facilitation training for Balfour Leadership Training Workshop and Team Queester. In this training video, we're going to focus on the Team Queester Facilitation Guide, most importantly, the chapter discussions that you'll have at Balfour. Now, the goal of the chapter discussions at Balfour is going to be to teach them about the Getting Results model and give them the opportunity to actually apply it. The Getting Results model is going to be used to help them identify areas of their chapter that they'd like to work on, and then help them with a process of knowing how to make positive change within their chapter. Before we get to that point though, although the brothers in the chapter are going to know each other very well, you as a facilitator are probably only going to have a couple points of contact with them prior to Balfour. So we want to start off with our first chapter discussion group with an introduction and an icebreaker. As I said, they know each other very well, but you don't. So this will give you the opportunity as the facilitator to take some notes on the details of each brother, what their name is, maybe where they're from, gain an interesting fact about who they are, and you'd be able to use this information throughout the rest of Balfour to help connect with that brother. So as you can see here in the chapter discussion group 1, as part of the facilitation guide, it starts off with the introductions and icebreakers. Underneath that, you can see that there in red we have some facilitation notes for you to use. It tells you that you can go to page 10 and 11 of the Team Queester Facilitation Notebook to record this information. So now we'll take a look at the Team Queester Facilitation Notebook and go to page 10 and 11 that was referenced in the facilitation guide for chapter discussion group number 1. Here you'll see a page to write down notes. You'll have the opportunity to write down each brother's name, what their expectation for Balfour is, maybe a personal goal or a goal they have for their chapter or perhaps in their role, and an interesting fact for each brother. As we scroll down, you can see that there's 10 spots available for you to write these notes. If you need more, you can always write them in the margin. But at least gives you somewhere where you can record this information and have it sitting next to your guide so you don't have to keep flipping the pages in the guide to be able to write down notes during discussion. Moving back to the facilitation guide, you can see that the second question is one of the items we just talked about in the facilitation notebook. You want to ask the undergrads, what are your expectations for this Balfour Leadership Training Workshop and also for the discussion group? We kind of want to know what their takeaway is that they're looking to get out of Balfour to help us kind of include whatever those expectations are into our planned facilitation. You can see on that second question there's also some notes referring you back to page 10 and 11 to record that information, which we've already seen. You'll also note that there are additional notes here in red, not just for this question, but the one above and ones that will come after this, to kind of help along with the why we're doing what we're doing as facilitators. As an example, on question number 2, understanding their expectations, Path Goal Theory of Leadership emphasizes participative leadership. So by asking this type of question, what are your expectations? What are the takeaways that you want to get? We have the opportunity to take those things and integrate their thoughts into the discussions that we're going to have throughout the week. According to this theory, it's going to increase the chance that the undergrads will engage in the conversation as they share in decision making. So as you can see here, most of what we're doing is not by happenstance. There's actually a point to why we're asking these questions. So I put additional notes in there so you guys have the opportunity to see what those motivations really are. Now that we've asked them what their expectations are, we definitely want to make sure as a facilitator we move on and outline our expectations for the group. We want to do things like make sure they're at every session, make sure that they participate. We want them to be open-minded and engage in helping one another overcome their obstacles, especially as we start to use the model. So you as a facilitator need to think about what your expectations are going to be for the group so that you can outline them here for them and make sure that they understand for the next 3 days what it is you're hoping to get out of them and to get out of Balfour. Now that they've had an opportunity to outline what their expectations are for Balfour, and you as the facilitator have had the opportunity to outline what your expectations are at Balfour, you want to move into asking them individually what their personal goals are for the upcoming year as an officer in their chapter. You can see in the notes there, it says on page 10 and 11, you can record this in the facilitation notebook, which we've already taken a look at. What this will do is give each individual officer the opportunity to express in front of not just you, but their chapter, what their goals are for the coming year. So as you can see in our notes, this kind of ties into path goal theory, where if we have a better understanding of what the goal attainment is for each follower in our group, we as leaders have the ability to choose specific methods and behaviors that support that individual and what their needs are in either overcoming the challenges they face or in what they need in support to fulfill those goals. So that's why we want to bring this up now, is to get an idea what their personal goals are and allow each of them to hear what each individual officer's goals are. So as we move more into the getting results model, and after they go back home from Balfour, they have an opportunity to help one another achieve those goals. Now that we've had the opportunity to get to know the brothers in the chapter a little bit, given them an opportunity to share their expectations for Balfour, and you've expressed what your expectations for Balfour are, while also hearing what some of their goals may be, we now want to move into a more conceptual discussion as a chapter. In order to do that, one of the first things that we should probably do is review the vision, mission, and fundamental purpose of Sigma Chi. Although we learned these as pledges, and they probably recently learned it going through P4B, reviewing this information gives them the opportunity to kind of see again, what is it that we're striving for in Sigma Chi. So to make that a little easier, you can see in the notes, I've written in the vision, the mission, and the fundamental purpose statements so that you have the opportunity to read them out to them and then ask them, what does each of them mean to you and why? We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I want them to kind of revisit the vision, mission, and purpose of Sigma Chi so they have that in mind as we start to work through the getting results model with them. Once you've had an opportunity to review the vision, mission, and fundamental purpose of Sigma Chi with the chapter, now you want to ask them what the vision and mission of their chapter is and why. Ask them how it defines them as a chapter. This should give them and you a little bit more insight into the culture of their chapter, the direction in which they want it to go, and how they plan to develop that vision that they have. If they don't have one, which many of them might not, you want to facilitate a conversation about that chapter vision. Help them understand that the vision is the direction in which they see themselves going, and help them create a mission that helps them define how they are going to get there. You can see in the manual that there's a spot for you to record notes on the vision and their why for that vision, as well as the mission and their why for that mission. You don't need to spend a lot of time on this section either, but just have them review what the vision and mission of their chapter is now that they've had the opportunity to review the vision, mission, and fundamental purpose of Sigma Chi. Once they've reviewed what their chapter vision and mission is, you can now ask them to define the strengths and weaknesses of their chapter and what they are. Once they've identified the distance and direction which they want to go with their vision and the method to which they want to carry it out in their mission, now you can ask them based on that measurement, what are the strengths and weaknesses you see in your chapter that are going to either help you accomplish your vision and mission or hold you back from your vision and mission. You don't need to spend a lot of time on this right now, as we'll get to this more during the discussion of the getting results model, but you want to get them in the mindset of what are some things that we want to work on as far as our strengths and weaknesses within our chapter. So record at least one strength and one weakness of the chapter at this point during the discussion. Next, if you have time, you want to briefly overview the getting results model and its components. In discussion group 2, we're really going to dive into the model, but you're probably going to be getting to the end of your session here, so we want to just give them a little overview of what's to come in the next session. To help you with the overview of the getting results model, you can turn to page 21 in your facilitation guide, which happens to be the second page of chapter discussion group number 2. You can see at the top of that page is an illustration of the getting results model. You can use this illustration to help introduce to the undergrads the 3 phases of the model itself, which is before, during, and after Balfour. You can also use it to introduce the 7 steps within the getting results model. As you can see here, number 1 being observe and ask questions, 2, listen and clarify, 3, debate, 4, decide and plan, 5, persuade, 6, execute and assess, and number 7 is learn. Now you're going to be going over this in greater detail in discussion group 2. So as I said, this is just an overview to kind of give them an idea of what they're going to be experiencing next. So we don't need to spend a whole lot of time diving into the details of each of these phases and steps. But if you spend any focus during this session on the getting results model, it would probably be the before Balfour phase, which encompasses steps 1 and 2, observe and ask questions, and listen and clarify. Even if the chapter doesn't think they've done this process before getting to Balfour, more than likely the officers of the chapter have observed the culture of their chapter throughout their tenure. They've probably also had the opportunity to listen to what other brothers think of their chapter, the issues that they need to solve, the direction that they need to go. And if you spend any time discussing the model, you would probably only spend it discussing these 2 areas. And again, it's just an overview to get them kind of interested in the model itself and give them a preview of what they're going to experience in the next session. So keep that in mind along with the time that you have left in your first session with the chapter, that we're going to be getting into greater detail on the getting results model, but introducing it to them at least gives them some time to think about the process and what they're about to go through in the next session. Once you've had an opportunity to briefly overview the getting results model with the chapter, you want to come back to page 12 in the facilitation guide to wrap up your first session. Now you want to ask the chapter, are you prepared to outline your chapter imperatives for our next session? What will 1 to 3 of those imperatives be? Now that you've gone through the model and they get an idea of what they're going to be doing in the next session, you can now have them think of 1 to 3 imperatives that they actually want to run through the model. What are 3 things, 3 issues, 3 problems, or maybe even 3 strengths that they want to build upon for their chapter going into the next year? Now there's 2 main objectives for you as the facilitator to ask this question before you leave your first session. Number 1, you want the undergrads to be thinking about those 3 imperatives and a little bit about the model before they get to the next session. That way when they come into chapter discussion number 2, they're kind of ready to roll with the material. But for you as a facilitator, it's really important to get an idea of the topics they want to talk about, because now you can begin thinking of those imperatives and how they tie into the curriculum, how they tie into the continuum, and how you're going to incorporate those imperatives into future discussions. And getting some of their reflections on Balfour to this point. As you can see here in the facilitation guide, we start off with what takeaways did they have from the Huntsman and Grand Council address. Our hope is that all of our chapters are going to attend Thursday night sessions, which include the Grand Council address, the Doug Carlson ritual experience, and a ritual discussion with ritual masters. As you've attended those events, you should have notes here as to what your takeaways were, and now you want to get their takeaways as well. The point of this will be to incorporate their takeaways into this discussion as well as future discussions. We want to remember to tie in these takeaways in the discussions to help them correlate lessons learned to new and future action items. As you can see at the top of the page, one of the things that we stress as a team are learning, knowledge, and action. This is really key in facilitation to help them understand that we first have to make a commitment to learning, the attainment of knowledge, and then taking that knowledge and turning it into action. This is a great opportunity with this session to show them the things that they learned, whether it was from the Grand Council address or the ritual discussion. These are things they can now incorporate into their experience at Balfour, as well as their experience when they go back home and are with their chapters. So you want to spend some time debriefing the Huntsman and Grand Council address, the Doug Carlson ritual experience, and the ritual discussion with ritual masters. Now let's say for some odd reason the chapter did not attend those events, which we hope they certainly do. If they happen to not go to the events, what we would like you to do is incorporate your takeaways, kind of describe a little bit of the experience and give them a little bit of a framework or background of how it was addressed, and then what your takeaways were, and let them discuss your takeaways from the experience. We don't want to just skip this section altogether, because we want to show them the importance of attending events like that and the importance of those messages into the discussions at Balfour and during their time back with their chapter. So here you can see in the guide we've got those three areas: the takeaways from Huntsman, the takeaways from the Doug Carlson ritual experience, and the takeaways from the ritual discussion. We also want to ask how these lessons and takeaways translate into their current role in the chapter and as a member of Sigma Chi. Each of them may have a different take on how it affects the duties of their office. So we want to ask them how they can use these experiences to improve as a leader. Now the goal would be to try and effectively debrief the previous night's events and hopefully about the first 15 minutes of the session. Because really the goal of this session will be to take those concepts and tie them into their understanding of the Getting Results model. So here you can see page 21 of our manual, which we used the previous day to give them the overview. Now we want to get into more detailed discussion of the 7 steps in the Getting Results model. So on this page you can see we have outlined the first 3 steps in the model, and that'll be the goal for this session, is to try and get through the discussion of the first 3 steps. If for whatever reason you're having good conversation and you don't think you're going to get through all 3 steps, that's no problem. It can carry over into the next session. But we want to try and get through as much of the material as we can so we can actually get to working the model with them. So here you can see step 1 in the Getting Results model is observe and ask questions. So we want to ask them, in determining how the brothers feel about the current state of their chapter, what actions or attitudes have you, that meaning the undergrads, observed from the chapter members that help determine their perspective on the chapter, and also your own? So we want to give them the opportunity to answer that question. You can see in the red that it takes you to page 21 of the Team Queester Facilitation Notebook to record their observations and other notes that you have for this particular discussion. Now keep in mind, this discussion in its initial stages, which is what we're in, is mostly about the process. But we want to make sure that we're recording the information that they talk about for future discussions. You'll also see in red there, and it's actually bolded, it helps you identify what page in their manual, that means the undergraduate's manual, follows along with this conversation. So their manual is a little bit different than ours. So you want to direct them to page 42 of their manual at this point for step number 1. Step 2 of the model is listen and clarify. So you want to ask the undergrads, have you, meaning the undergrads, truly listened to what is being said by others, the others meaning their chapter mates? Can you clarify those ideas? So you can see in step 2 we have additional facilitation notes. So after identifying how the chapter, which we're considering the non-present members in this conversation, may feel about the chapter's culture, we want to know, how does that compare to the officers, meaning the brothers that are present? So you can begin to guide the conversation so they can kind of see, have they truly listened effectively? Is the rest of the chapter's view different than the officers present at Balfour? Have the chapter identify from both their perspective and the chapter's what their strengths, problems, opportunities, and threats are, which is the SPOT analysis. If you have the undergrads go to page 43 in their manuals, they can record the SPOT analysis there. Now remember, if we go back to our facilitation notebook, here you can record the notes that you have from this conversation. So you want to record their perspectives. You want to also ask stimulating questions. What are brothers most excited about in regard to your chapter? What do they complain about? This is a couple questions you can use to get them thinking about, okay, are you really listening to what they're saying, and what is it that they are actually saying? So here you can write your notes, and you can also write down the SPOT analysis results that they have during their discussion. What are their strengths? What are their problems? What are their opportunities? And what are their threats? Now flipping back, we'll take a look quick at step number 3, which is debate. So we want them to measure the perspectives and ideas discussed in our vision, mission, and fundamental purpose. So if we think back to chapter discussion 1, that's where they, meaning the undergrads, reviewed the vision, mission, and fundamental purpose of Sigma Chi. So we want them to discuss how the current state of their chapter, how things are now, not where they want it to go, but how they are now, measure against those aspirations. So based on that measurement, you can now facilitate their discussion on the areas most imperative to address in the short term and long term of their chapter. And again, I just want to throw in as a reminder here, we're helping them through the process. This is the first go of them seeing the model itself. So we want to have kind of a light discussion on this. We're going to be incorporating the imperatives, and you can use one of their imperatives as the model to have this discussion. So we want them to start debating a little bit here. What are the things that they want to address in the short term? What do they want to address in the long term? You can refer them to page 47 in their manual to follow along with step number 3, debate. And as we've been mentioning over here in the facilitation notebook, step number 3, debate, gives you some notes on how to continue to fuel the conversation and to stimulate their thoughts, asking questions like how will the new leadership and feedback models, along with programs like P4B and R4L, impact the state of your chapter. So now you're giving them some specific programs within Sigma Chi, or like the leadership model that they're just learning at Balfour. How is that going to help them achieve their goals, both short-term and long-term? So generate that conversation, take notes on it, and you can use that to drive the end of this discussion. And again, if you have to move this into the next session, that's okay, but we want to try and stay on target with getting the first 3 steps in this particular discussion as best we can. As you begin chapter discussion group number 3, you want to make sure that you carry over any part of the discussion from chapter discussion group 2 that you guys weren't able to finish. So if you weren't able to get through the first 3 steps of the Getting Results model, you want to continue that discussion before getting to step 4. But if you did have the opportunity to get through it, or once you do, you want to move to step number 4, decide and plan. So propose to the undergrads, having debated the most imperative goals in step number 3, decide which will be addressed and begin the strategic planning process. You can see here in the facilitation notes it says use the action planning worksheet from the Team Queester facilitation notebook page 24, which we also have available on our website if you want to download and print extra copies before you come to Balfour, and use that in conjunction with the undergrad's manual pages 48 through 51 to help them create their plan. Now before we get to that template, let's jump over to the facilitation notebook and take a look at chapter discussion group 3 notes. So you can see we have step 4, 5, and 6 on this page. We'll talk about step 7 in a minute. So you can see here on the decide plan, which is step number 4, you have a spot to record your facilitation notes. You also want to ask some questions to stimulate conversation, so we've thrown some questions in there that you can use, such as now that you've started working through the Getting Results model, have the imperatives you've listed in your first chapter session changed? We actually want to ask that question because now they understand the process a little bit. They might want to change what they want to talk about, and if they do, that's okay. But at this point, you've probably decided on one of those imperatives and have gotten to step 4. So you can continue on. Has the process challenged you to think about the culture and needs of your chapter? Another question could be, has the process confirmed your thoughts? So now you want to record notes on that discussion and actually get to the action plan. So we're going to jump down 2 pages in this manual and take a look at the action plan template that we have in our manual. Now this is a custom-made template. It's a little bit different than the template that they have in their manuals, which is okay. This one's just a little bit more elaborate than that one, and you can see the difference. But here we want to identify what imperative we're working on, which goal, who are going to be the leaders, and then help them by creating conversation develop what action steps they're going to have to take to be able to achieve their goal. Now one of the things that's different is ours includes benchmarks, milestones, the wins means what are we going to do to celebrate once we achieve our goal? What's the win going to be? And then how are we going to anchor it in the culture? Whether you get to these steps or not, that's completely up to you as a facilitator. They don't have that on their action planning worksheet, but this has a little bit of a change management feel to it, and it's something that I kind of like and use in my corporate life. So if you choose to use it, that's great. If not, no worries. You can also see down at the bottom, we've gotten a little bit more elaborate on What are the potential barriers? What's our elimination plan? What resources do we have? What do we need? What's our procurement plan going to be? And then review date and notes. So this is just a template you can use to kind of guide that conversation. Again, they can follow along in their manual and actually have them go through and write out their action plan, at least in a modified form. I understand time sensitive, but we want them to get a good feel for the action planning process. After creating their action plan, we want to come back to the facilitation guide and start working on step number 5, which is persuade. I'm actually excited to see that this is part of the manual this year, because in years past I don't feel that we did a great job of actually helping them understand what it's going to be to go back to their chapter, what it's going to be like to go back to their chapter, and actually have to persuade the members of the chapter to believe in the vision and the mission and the action plans that they've set for the chapter for the coming year. So I think this is a really important step, and you can start by asking, as your chapter has not been involved in the planning process here at Balfour, how can this group persuade the chapter to become stakeholders in this process, and what role will they play in making the chapter strategy a reality? I think this is a very important question. If we're going to spend any time on this process, all 7 steps, in my opinion, this is probably the most important. How are you going to go home and communicate this in a way that gets the brothers to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish as an executive committee? So you can see we have some facilitation notes here. We want you to use page 22 of your Team Queester facilitation notebook to help guide the discussion and record your notes. You can have the undergrads refer to their manual pages number 52 to 55. And if we flip over to the facilitation notebook, here you can see step number 5, persuade, where you can actually start to write down some of the notes from the discussion. And I like the talking points that are in here. Here's some questions you can ask while they follow along in their manual. How will you communicate the importance of the action planning process? How will you communicate the why? So many people in the chapter have probably never been through the action planning process. By this point, some of them may, as it's the strategic planning process, just kind of repackaged a little bit. But a lot of these guys are new to the chapter, have only been a year or two, and haven't had a position where they've been responsible for this. So we actually have to go back and sell the planning process itself a little bit. We can also ask, how will you incorporate Sigma Chi's vision, mission, and purpose to help the chapter understand their connection? As we mentioned when we talked about it earlier, when we brought up the vision, mission, and purpose of Sigma Chi, although we learn about that during our pledgeship, we learn about that during P4B, how often are we talking about it in our everyday actions with the chapter? It's good to ask the guys that are at Balfour, hey, how are you going to incorporate those things when you go back and actually try to sell your vision and mission for your chapter? We also have how will you propose the imperatives and goals developed here at Balfour and relate their importance and relevance. We really want to start to understand how this group plans to individually take on roles to be able to propose the imperatives and goals developed at Balfour and translate why it's important for the chapter moving forward. We can also ask how will you express the importance of your chapter's involvement in the process. Here we want to try and create some buy-in. And if we can get the guys back at the chapter to understand that their involvement is key for us to achieve our goals, we have a higher likelihood that they'll become stakeholders, a higher likelihood that they'll get engaged in the process. Now remember, the point of this is to get the undergrads that are at Balfour to understand the process and the reason why behind it. So while we want to go through this and we want to actually answer these questions in our session, we want them to understand that it's not just about answering the questions for themselves here at Balfour. How are we going to go back home and persuade the chapter and sell them on our vision and mission? Once you feel confident in their understanding of persuasion, you can move on to step 6, which is execute and assess. So you want to ask them, how will this group execute this plan? How will you adjust if necessary and keep each other accountable to the group-determined contributions? You can see there's a facilitation note that reminds you to use page 22 of the Team Queester facilitation notebook to help guide your discussion. You can refer the undergrads to their manual page number 56 for step number 6 in the process. So if we shoot over to the facilitation notebook, you can see there's step 6 at the bottom of the page, execute, assess, and it's got notes on helping guide this conversation. So we want to make sure that we're asking questions to kind of stimulate the conversation on execution and assessment. So you can ask them, who will be responsible for tracking the progress of each imperative? Who will communicate the progress of the imperative to the chapter? Who will measure that progress? And so on. You can see in the black underneath the red notes, there's a spot to actually record this. So if you ask, how will you communicate the responsibilities of each delegate listed in the imperative action plan, you can write down how are you going to do it, who's going to do it, and when. And this is not necessarily part of the action plan. They've already kind of done this, but this actually helps them understand, okay, we're actually going to talk about how we're going to execute it, who's going to do it, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, and you can ask that for those 3 questions there. So once they've created their action plan, once they've talked about persuasion, now you want to talk to them about execution and make sure they have a good plan to know who's doing what and who's going to hold each other accountable. Now you'll notice that in the facilitation notebook, step 7 of the process is not in here. If we go back to the facilitation guide, which again you'll have sitting right next to you, you can see step number 7 is learn. And there's a reason why we've left this out of the notebook. So ask them to review the questions on page 57 of their manual. If we go back to the facilitation notebook, you can see that that page, step number 7, learn, you can see at the bottom there, page number 57 is in here. And it has questions that you can discuss. As you can see, number 1, what's going well in your role? Any wins, big or small? What challenges are you facing? Right? How's the morale around your chapter? So if we go back to the facilitation guide, you can see in red that basically what we're saying is this step number 7 is something they're going to have to do after they go back to the chapter and actually execute their plan. So what you want to do here is kind of have the members take turns asking the questions that are in their guide and just discussing the importance of the question, because they won't actually be able to answer those questions at Balfour because they haven't yet gone back to the chapter and executed the plan. But if you spend your time focusing your discussion on the importance of those questions, the importance of the reason for them to focus on learning from the process, then that'll help you guide the final portion of the Getting Results model, step number 7, which is learn. So as I mentioned again, and we just saw, a copy of that manual page is in your facilitation notebook, page number 23, for your reference. At this point, you've had the opportunity to go through all 7 steps of the Getting Results model with your chapter. Again, the goal of this process was to get them to understand each step and its importance. And at this point, hopefully you've actually had the opportunity to talk about at least one of the imperatives they've had for their chapter and go through all 7 steps with that imperative. Once you've done that, if you have additional time in your session, you can move on to what we were going to begin in chapter group session 4, which is using the Getting Results model and continuing the process to work on the imperatives that they want to work on as a chapter. So chapter discussion group 4, which can go in conjunction with the end of chapter discussion group 3, is just to continue to help them use the model to work on the imperatives that they've outlined for their chapter. So you can see here on discussion group number 4, use the Getting Results model, continue the process, add imperatives, continue to discuss, and we have some facilitation notes just to remind you that we're using this session to have the undergrads lead their own Getting Results model process. You've gone through it with them as the facilitator so they understand the process. Now you want them to try and use the process themselves. Now keep in mind, that doesn't mean that you're not involved in the conversation or that you're not facilitating the process with discussion. They just started the process. They're just getting used to it. So we want to kind of let them take over the reins a little bit, but we want to make sure that you're helping facilitate the conversation to keep it on point, keep it on track, and make sure that their time is useful. You can refer to page 27 in the facilitation notebook so that you can make additional notes. We'll flip over there real quick so you can see page number 27. Here it is. And basically it's a condensed version of the notes that we had when we were going through the model in more detail. So here it's a little bit more broken down for you and condensed, I should say, to one page. It still gives you the opportunity to ask those same questions to kind of fuel the conversation, but also give you a place to take some notes. So you can refer to that page while they're trying to drive the process themselves and help facilitate their conversation. Now, I want to point out at the bottom here that we have to remember that SIGFest follows this session. So if you think that your chapter is progressing very well and they're kind of above the expectations you had for them as a group, if you want to give them a little bit of time to get to SIGFest or to prepare for SIGFest, I think that that's okay. This session's supposed to go till 10 p.m. If you want to let them go a little bit earlier so that they can actually get to SIGFest at 10 p.m., which is when it starts, feel free to do that. But if you think that they need the time, if they haven't quite gotten all the concepts, or maybe they're really close to finishing their own walkthrough of the model, go ahead and use that time, use the full time, so that they can make it through the process and really understand it. Keep in mind that you have chapter sessions the following day that they can use to continue their planning. So taking a look at that, when we get to chapter discussion group 5, which is going to happen on Saturday, we're basically saying the same thing as we did in chapter discussion group 4. We want you to work the model again for one of your imperatives. So as we talked about on day 1, what are 3 imperatives that you want to discuss here at Balfour? By this point in time, hopefully chapter discussion group 5, they're working the getting results model with that 3rd imperative. So keep in mind, while we're actually helping them solve problems, the goal of Balfour this year, especially for our team, is to help these guys understand what the getting results model is and what the 7 steps are. Understanding that once they get home, they might not use it in a similar manner as they did here at Balfour, but they're going to have access to the worksheets in their manuals if they want to use them. But we really want them to key up on what those 7 steps are to be successful in actually achieving their goals. So by this point, we're using our time to help them continue in that process, and in chapter discussion group 5, hopefully working on their 3rd imperative that they wanted to talk about at Balfour. Now, if you look down below, you'll see at the bottom of the notes for discussion group 5, this is a 2-hour session. So we want to make sure that we leave enough time to help the chapter prepare for their province session presentation. So if we look down at the bottom of this page, you can see that there's a province presentation preparation that we would like them to go through. So we can follow the steps below. You can refer them to their manual page 59 to record notes. But what we're trying to do is help them actually take one of these imperatives or have them take the different things that they want to accomplish in their role as Queester, Magister, Consul, whatever it is, and actually present that at their province session that they're going to have later in the day. So when we take a look at it, we want to look at step 1, our imperatives. You want them to list out the imperatives that they've agreed upon at Balfour and why they've chosen those. Why are those areas of focus? And why are those for the good of the chapter, campus, and community? We want to help them determine who will present the imperatives during the province session as well. That's kind of the point of this, is to help them actually prepare how they're going to deliver it. And this is good practice for how they're going to go home and actually deliver it to their chapter as well. So we want somebody to step up and kind of describe the goals that they've determined to strive for and to support their chapter vision. So you want to come up with what those goals are, and you want to also determine who's actually going to present those when they get into the province session. Now, one of the notes you can see there is, I want you to make every effort to try and include multiple officers to present this material. We don't want just one guy from the chapter getting up in the province session and laying out all their imperatives and the process they went through to try and make sure they go back to their chapter and implement them. We want to make sure that we're getting all the guys that show up to Balfour engaged in this process. So we want them to present examples also of the chapter alumni support that they're going to need in order to achieve their imperatives. That's one of the things that's in their manual and something that would probably be good to have them present too, because it gets them kind of thinking, okay, if we want to do this, can we do it all on our own, or are we going to need support? So one of the members of the chapter or multiple members of the chapter can actually deliver some of the support needs in front of the province so they can say, hey, this is what we're looking for. There's also the potential that in the province breakout, they actually have some alumni that are local to their province that have come to Balfour that can hear what their needs are and maybe help them out. So again, the final note on this session in helping them in preparing the province presentation is incorporate all the chapter members at some point during the presentation. Just as a quick reminder on the facilitation notebook, if you go to your facilitation notebook and look at page 29, you'll see that for the Officer Discussion Group 5, where you're probably going through the third imperative that they wanted to talk about and running it through the Getting Results model, there's another condensed page for you as the facilitator to write notes and have some facilitation notes there on the questions that you can ask to help generate conversation if they need to. Hopefully as a chapter they're starting to get the process a little bit and they're rolling on their own, but keep in mind our job is to be there to facilitate that conversation, make sure it's staying productive and on task, and that the focus is on the steps themselves and what they need to accomplish in each. As we scroll down to the bottom, just as a quick reminder, step number 7, learn. You can tell them to go back to their manual page number 57 since we didn't include that in our templates, since that's something they're going to do back at their chapter. You can always review that at the end of each strategic planning model that you run, just so they understand that coming back and actually reviewing what they learned from the process, actually trying to execute the imperative would be good to do. Now, the one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is this is your last session with your chapter. So as you go through that third imperative, as you try to get them ready to present for their province, once they go to their province, they're done with chapter sessions for Balfour. So this is your last session that you'll have with them. So if you want to save some time to have maybe a little bit of a candle pass or GDO to end your session and kind of give everybody an opportunity to reflect on their Balfour experience, certainly to give you as a facilitator an opportunity in a more special light to translate your thoughts on what you saw of them as a chapter, how they grew as a chapter and grew individually. I think that's an excellent way to kind of close out your chapter group for the week. So hopefully you have some time for that, plan for that time, and depending on how many guys you have in your session, you want to try and save at least 2 to 3 minutes for each guy to give their reflection of their Balfour experience as well as you, so that you can properly close out your chapter discussion and kind of have a nice send-off as the facilitator, tell them that you appreciate their involvement in Balfour this year, all of their efforts, and to reinforce the fact that you're going to be there as the facilitator for the remainder of the year to help them out after they get back to the chapter.